welcome to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Jahnke. We just had week 13. We had 11 games of football today, ending with the snowy game in Buffalo. It was another interesting week of football. Unfortunately, a number of injuries. Taysom Hill's injury sounds like it's serious. We just had Christian McCaffrey get hurt in the game tonight. So unfortunately, a couple injuries that happened today, but a lot of interesting things, a lot of rookies seeing more playing time than we're used to seeing. We'll be going over some of that in the top 5 recap today. But before I jump in, I just want to remind everyone that we do have a promo code going on right now. Score 35 gets you 35% off of a year-long subscription. It goes until tomorrow, Cyber Monday. So you have one more day to use that code to get a year-long PFF subscription. That gets you access to a ton of things that you wouldn't ordinarily have access to. Our premium stats, for one, it has all of our grades, snap counts for several years now of data of how teams have used their players, how good the players have played, stats that you're not going to find anywhere else. It also gets you access to a bunch of my articles. You can, of course, see my recap articles where I go over all 11 games from today that you can get without the subscription. But in order to access my other articles, like my waiver wire article, like my start sit article, and probably most importantly, my rankings, which are currently in the top 10 in Fantasy Pros ranking competition. So rankings have been going well this year. So if you want access to those rankings and the tools associated with those rankings, our start sit tool, for example, you need a PFF Plus subscription, and now is the best time to get that with that Score 35 code. So with that, I will jump into my top couple takeaways, and they are all going to be running back related today. Definitely a couple interesting things about wide receivers and tight ends, but want to go over the running backs because those are the most interesting things that happened today. And we will start with the Los Angeles Rams, where we saw Blake Corum play more in this game than we have seen in a game so far this season. Kyren Williams started the game, played the snaps on the first drive, which was no surprise, but then Corum came in on the second drive and took 7 of the 12 snaps on that drive. And typically in every other game this season, we have seen Williams dominate the snaps on both the first and second drives of games. Corum had only taken 2 snaps within the first 2 drives of games prior to this week. So even on those first 2 drives, this was very different than what we've seen before. He ran the ball 5 times, looked pretty good during that time where Williams did not have a run. So at the time, it looked like Corum could have potentially been fully taking over at running back, but it was pretty common for Corum to see at least some playing time relatively early in games, even if it wasn't quite this early. So that was interesting in itself. And then Williams basically played the rest of the first half. The Rams had a long drive to start the third quarter, but after that point, we saw a mix of Williams and Corum throughout the rest of the game. So it was a pretty even 11-11 split from the second drive of the third quarter until the end of the game. So we saw Corum play 16 snaps to only, or 18 snaps compared to only 38 by Williams. So a lot more of a split than what we're used to. The only thing is I'm not sure we will continue to see Corum see more work than we saw this week. Looking at their numbers season long or recently, Williams is still looking decently better than Corum in a number of categories, including PFF grade. The one area where Corum has the advantage is he has not fumbled yet, where Williams has fumbled multiple times on runs this season. It did not happen in this game, though. So I think Williams will continue to at least be the starter. We'll continue to see the majority of the work, but I don't know if this game will be an anomaly or if we'll go back to seeing Williams play the vast majority of snaps or if Corum will cut in even further. I'm still probably trusting Williams in my starting lineup, at least for the foreseeable future. Even if there's this split of snaps, the Rams are still committed to running the ball, and Williams will still get a lot of carries. So even though this probably hurts his upside a little bit, it's not a death sentence to Williams, and I don't think we'll see Corum take over, at least in these next few weeks. So if you have Williams in your lineup, you can trust him. Corum is still someone I think worth picking up off the waiver wire, though, just because there is a chance he could see more playing time. And with how much the Rams like to run the ball, that would be huge for him. So I think it's still worth having Corum on your roster just in case, but I'm still siding with Williams in general. And I am seeing a few questions in chat. I'll probably handle all of them at the end of this just because all of these are running back related. Some of the questions I'm seeing are not running back related. So want to stick with the flow of running backs for now, but then we'll try to get to at least some of these questions once I get through the running backs. But I will stay in Los Angeles where we saw J.K. Dobbins land on injured reserve on Saturday. At this point of the season, that's terrible news for anyone in fantasy because there's only a couple weeks left. The soonest that Dobbins is eligible to return is week 17, in which case it's fantasy championship weekend. It would be his first game back, a chance to ease him into action, a chance that he needs to wait another week before he comes back. So it's pretty unlikely Dobbins will have fantasy value again in the season if you're in normal redraft leagues. So if you have him on your roster, unless you think there's a chance you might want to start him week 17, you should be fine dropping him. Austin Eckler is another one, ended up on injured reserve, and the Commanders have their bye week next week. So Eckler isn't even eligible to return in week 17. So if you have Eckler, not even worth stashing him on your injured reserve spot at this point. You're free to move on from him and get someone else who could potentially help you this season. What we saw out of the Chargers running backs without J.K. Dobbins largely went as expected. Gus Edwards started the game and was the lead running back, which we've seen him be the number 2 running back all season when he's been healthy. This really shouldn't have surprised anyone that he was playing the majority of snaps. We did see Kamani Vidal, who has been inactive anytime both Edwards and Dobbins were healthy, but now that Dobbins is out, Vidal should be on the game day roster over the rest of the season and should be the number 2 running back. The only difference with what we're seeing now compared to what we saw earlier in the season when it was Edwards who was injured is this is more of a 3-man backfield because it seems like they trust Haskins the most on passing downs out of these 3 running backs. So this was a little bit more of a 3-man committee. I know Haskins also saw the snap at the goal line. Don't necessarily expect that to continue going forward. But all 3 of these running backs played on the first drive. They all rotated in and out more or less throughout the game, but there were the tendencies of Edwards and Vidal on early downs and Haskins on third downs. I do think this is a fluid enough situation that if Kamani Vidal starts playing significantly better than Gus Edwards, there's a chance that he could become the starter, but I'm not necessarily sure that will be happening anytime soon. In this game, the Chargers were not running the ball a ton. Really, time of possession wasn't great for the Chargers in this game, only 24 minutes with the ball. But Edwards averaged 5.3 yards per carry, Vidal fewer carries, only averaged 5 yards per carry. So both of them looked good, but it was still Edwards who looked a little bit better. Vidal, most of it was on a 16-yard carry from him, so he did have the best run of the day. So a chance we might see this inch closer to 50-50 on early downs, but I'm not sure if Vidal will get to a point where he is the starting running back for the Chargers this season. I still think it's fine to pick him up off the waiver wire. I think it's fine to consider him more so than some of the other running backs who are clearly handcuff options and need an injury in order to see more playing time. But I think Vidal is someone who at least can be stashed on fantasy rosters for now, especially when it's a time where only 6 teams left with the bye week. You want to have those backup spots for players who have high upside, who could do something well, rather than just guys who are going to sit on your bench and never join your starting lineup, even if there's an injury to a teammate of theirs. Next running back situation I want to cover is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where we saw Bucky Irving have the best game of his season. He hadn't had a 100-yard game so far this season, and he had 100 yards. He got to 150 yards in this game. So Irving was looking very good in this game. Rachaad White didn't have nearly as many carries. He was also running the ball well, a high yards per carry average. Just to interrupt slightly because I'm seeing breaking news, Christian McCaffrey, potential season-ending PCL injury, which is not great. Jordan Mason took over for the rest of the game like it was early in the season, but anyone who drafted Christian McCaffrey, this is not good to see, or anyone for just McCaffrey in general, considering where he is at his point in his career. But going back to the Buccaneers, now that I'm not seeing that on the corner of my eye anymore. So Irving did a great job in this game. But in terms of the utilization, this really wasn't all that different compared to what we've seen. It was just a game script and a situation where the Buccaneers wanted to run the ball a lot. We still saw Rachaad White as the clear third down back, the clear 2-minute drill back, split snaps at the goal line. Bucky Irving did play significantly more on early downs than Rachaad White, which we have seen in the past few weeks. Irving playing more than White on early downs. This was a slightly bigger majority than what we've seen. We just saw the Buccaneers have a lot more plays on early downs than we're used to seeing, which allowed them to run the ball more on early downs, which allowed them to just keep giving Irving the ball over and over. So going forward, I think some of this was more game script related. I don't think we're going to see a lot change out of Tampa Bay over the rest of the year. I think they like this two-man split. Having Rachaad White be more limited this season in his playing time has helped his efficiency. So even though Irving has looked very good and we want him to see as much playing time as possible, Rachaad White is also playing well. So I think we will continue to see the split. I don't think too much will change because of this week, but I still think Irving is someone who can be in fantasy starting lineups over these next few weeks. The Buccaneers have a relatively favorable schedule. Particularly in the fantasy playoffs. They have matchups against the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Cowboys, and then the Panthers again. So these next 4 weeks, relatively favorable games where Tampa Bay should remain close in the games at least, so they should be able to keep running the ball. Some defenses who have allowed a lot of fantasy points to running backs. So I think Irving can be a fantasy starter, even though I expect this to remain a two-man committee. Next one is the Jacksonville Jaguars, which was a relatively quiet game for the Jacksonville running backs in general. Jacksonville didn't have the best game. They kept it close against the Houston Texans, but it was a lot of throwing the ball. They were playing from behind for a lot of the game, so it really only became close in the fourth quarter. But the big thing here is Dearness Johnson, who had been one of the 3 running backs in a Jacksonville 3-man rotation, was a healthy and active this game. It was Keelan Robinson, their 5th-round running back, who started the season on injured reserve, recently came back from injured reserve. He was active in this game, but he did not see a single snap on offense. So it seemed like they wanted Robinson on the active roster for whatever reason over Johnson. But this meant that instead of a 3-back committee, it was a 2-back committee. So ETN and Bigsby split playing time fairly evenly throughout the game in almost every situation. If you are watching this rather than listening, you can see the pie graphs that I have in my articles where I break down running back roles in early downs, goal line, short yardage, third downs, and 2-minute drill. And a lot of these are either exactly even or just off by a snap or two. So pretty even split between ETN and Bigsby, which was great to see, especially with Bigsby missing the previous game Jacksonville played. So I think Bigsby, even though he didn't have a great game and neither did ETN, I think Bigsby is probably one of the top running back options off the waiver wire because he is one of the few players that we know is going to see significant playing time. Jacksonville's schedule, I believe, lightens up a little bit as well, so Jacksonville should be able to stick more with the run game going forward. So I think Bigsby can have a significant role, and if he can return to his form from earlier in the season where he was one of the better graded runners in the league, Bigsby could potentially have some big games, especially if we see Trevor Lawrence have to miss some time. That could lead them to rely even more on the run game. So still believe in Bigsby this season. I think he and ETN can continue to split this playing time. It was another situation where ETN had more carries, but Bigsby had more yards per carry, which is something we've seen a lot this season. So I think with this being Bigsby's first game back after the injury, they may have eased him in a little bit. I could see him seeing more snaps on early downs going forward, with ETN taking some more of the snaps on passing downs. Our last running back situation I want to cover is the Pittsburgh Steelers, which this is probably more of a long-term thing I want to cover than a short-term. But we started the game with Najee Harris dominating snaps on the first 2 drives. Jaylen Warren only taking 2 snaps, including the only third down and medium, no third and long over that time. And Cordero Patterson just saw 1 snap as a wide receiver over those 2 drives. So nothing out of the ordinary. But then Harris was off to the medical tent, or at least met with the trainers for a little bit, did not play at all on Pittsburgh's third drive. So I would have expected Jaylen Warren to see most of the snaps on the third drive, but it was Cordarrelle Patterson who played 8 of the 10 snaps on the drive, and Warren playing only 2 snaps. So over the past 2 years, Warren has been someone who has done a great job in his opportunities. He's averaged a high yards per carry when he's been healthy, as well as all the work he's done as a receiver. So for a long time now, I viewed Warren as one of the top handcuff options at running back, because if something were to happen to Harris, I would have expected Warren to have this huge role in the offense, get a lot of carries to go along with his receiving work, and have a ton of fantasy value. But Harris has remarkably stayed healthy throughout his career. He has not missed a game in his 4 years, which is pretty something we don't see all the time at running back. Most of the time, every running back misses at least 1 game over the course of a season, let alone 4 seasons. So Harris having this role, or having this health, has been great for him. Harris was able to return on the 4th drive. Patterson only played 1 more snap at wide receiver on that drive, and then didn't see another snap on offense the rest of the game. We were back to Harris and Warren in their usual rotation throughout the rest of the game. But the big thing for me is, if Harris were to suffer an injury, I'm no longer going to trust Warren as much as the handcuff, because of what happened on this one drive, which I know it's a relatively small sample size, but it is the one sample size we have of Harris not being healthy in this offense. So I wouldn't be surprised if Harris were to miss a game over these last couple weeks, that it would be Cordarrelle Patterson seeing a lot more work, and Warren keeping his passing down role. And Patterson, it was as recently as early last season in Arthur Smith's offense that he had a very large role in the offense, or at least maybe it was 2 years ago at this point. Maybe I'm getting my years a little confused, but Patterson, I know in Arthur Smith's offense at one point had an every down role. So I think they still view Patterson as someone who is capable of doing that, even though he was playing more wide receiver to start this game. So a little more down on Warren, and I think he is especially someone that it really depends on your league right now. If he is not starting in your fantasy lineups these past couple weeks, then he's probably not going to be in your starting lineup these next few weeks. He is the kind of player that I'm probably more okay dropping if you're not starting him, and instead picking up a running back that has more upside over the rest of the season, or a wide receiver that has more upside over the rest of the season, or picking up an extra defense, preventing one of your league mates to be able to pick up a good defense in the playoffs, and those kind of things. So I would definitely, as we get closer to the fantasy playoffs, if you have already clinched a spot in the playoffs, or if you're no longer fighting for a first round bye or those kind of things, then I think it's really time to start making those kind of moves in your league. Before I leave, want to cover a couple of the questions that I had. First one, if James Conner is sidelined, could we see a split backfield between Trey Benson and Amari DiMercato? And could that reduce the value of either one as a fantasy asset? I would think if Conner were to get sidelined, I think Trey Benson would more or less take over the Conner role. Throughout the season, Amari DiMercato has been the passing down back for Arizona. I think that's the role they see him in. Even going back to the preseason, we were seeing some of this where they had clear third down backs. It was DiMercato and Michael Carter fighting for the third down role, where Trey Benson was the backup on first and second downs that was seeing a lot of playing time in the preseason. So I think we would basically see Trey Benson in the James Conner role, which is why Benson has been one of my top waiver wire options at running back for a while. Has moved down the waiver wire list this week just because there are some more intriguing options that I trust more to get playing time. But I think if something were to happen to Conner, I think Benson would take over those snaps, and DiMercato would just stay in his usual role as the third down back and 2-minute drill back. And another one, thoughts on CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard. Pollard had an interesting game in that he didn't do a lot in the run game. He wasn't given a ton of opportunities. The Titans fell behind almost immediately and therefore had to keep passing the ball to keep up. he averaged 4.4 yards per carry, which was fine, and caught 4 passes for 33 yards. The Titans just weren't in an opportunity to run the ball very much. Tyjae Spears, who had a concussion, returned this week, but he did not return to his usual role. Tony Pollard played almost all of the snaps on early downs. It was really just in the 2-minute drill that Spears saw any significant playing time. So this was very different than any other game where both running backs were playing. It could be a case where Spears just needed a game to get eased back into action and we go back to normal next week. But there is also a chance that Pollard is just going to continue playing this very high percentage of offensive snaps going forward. They trusted him with over 80% of snaps in all 4 games that Spears has missed so far this season. So they have no problem having him on the field a ton. So we could see Pollard play a lot more going forward. And I think, if I'm remembering right, I could be off here, but I believe Washington was the last team that Tennessee plays with a winning record over the rest of the fantasy season at least. So the Titans should be staying closer in games, allowing them to stick further with the run game. So I think Pollard should have better weeks this week than he did this week. And CeeDee Lamb, I'm generally fine with him going forward. He still has a relatively high target share. The Giants were able to slow him down this week, but Lamb was playing decently better the weeks before this. So still generally trusting Lamb in my fantasy starting lineups. Not positive I'll be putting him in my top 12 wide receivers, but I think still someone that should be in fantasy lineups going forward. And then one more, should I hold on to Devontae Smith and Hopkins or drop any of them for Thielen or Nick Westbrook-Ikhine? I'm generally holding on to Smith. I know he's been dealing with the injury, which isn't great, and then had poor weeks before that. But before the injury and before those 2 weeks, he was very consistently having good games, and the Eagles' offense is playing very well. So I trust Smith more so to be able to return to his normal workload this season and be a fantasy starter again. Hopkins, I'm less confident on. The Chiefs are rotating their wide receivers a ton, similar to what we were seeing 2 years ago, as well as last year before Rashee Rice emerged. And even though it's a little less rotating of the wide receivers, but with Noah Gray, they're using a lot more 2 tight end sets. So that's still only a 4-man rotation at wide receiver. Also, rumors that Hollywood Brown could be coming back sometime soon, which would impact that wide receiver rotation as well. Would expect Brown to just be eased into action, but that's everyone that could see a decrease in snaps because they like to use those wide receivers a little more interchangeably. Westbrook-Ikhine is probably the wide receiver that I like the most of the group, even though it's the 8 touchdowns compared to 20 total catches. So everything about regression says that he should be regressing. But he did see a season high in targets this week, dropped a pass in there, so that impacted his receptions totals, but not worried about that too much. But the fact that he is seeing more and more targets is a positive sign that he can keep having more receiving production. And the Titans have an excellent schedule for wide receivers over these next 4 weeks. I think 3 of the 4 matchups are very good. So, and the Titans really haven't had the greatest matchups over these past couple weeks. They've all been neutral to slightly favorable, but these next couple ones are very favorable for the Tennessee passing game. So Westbrook-Ikhine is probably the one that I'd pick up. Thielen, I think, is an intriguing option, but I am concerned about Jalen Coker, who has missed the last 2 weeks due to injury. They both play the slot role. I'm not sure how the Panthers will end up rotating the wide receivers once Coker is back, but Thielen might see a decrease of playing time because of that. And then I see some talk about defenses. I'll be honest, I have not looked too much at which defenses are the best ones to pick up in week 17 and 16 right now. Something I definitely should be looking into, but I will be honest, I haven't looked enough into it to give a confident answer right now. See one more question about the 49ers running backs. Have Mason on the bench, have other running backs, and the CMC owner wants Mason. Should you trade Mason with those other running backs that you have? I think it's probably fine to trade him, assuming that you can only start 2 running backs. If you could start 3, I still might hold on to him. in order to get Collins, I think that is at least a little bit of an upgrade. But Jackson Smith-Njigba has been playing very well these past couple weeks. Over 69 receiving yards in I think his last 4 or 5 games, compared to just one of those games previously in his career. So even though Collins is an upgrade, it's probably a favorable trade to make anyway with the other running backs you have. Mason should still do well, but if you're starting Barkley and Gibbs every week and can't start another running back, then you're probably not starting Mason anyway. So I would probably make that trade as long as you're not too worried about that other team winning the championship with having 2 good players on their team if they have a hole on their roster. And with that, I think I will cut it off there. I hope everyone had a great week 13. I hope you were able to win your fantasy matchups already. I know Scott Fishbowl, at least for me, has been going great. Should be advancing in the playoffs another week. So I am happy with my fantasy performances recently. Before I close it off completely, just want to remind everyone again of the sale that we have going on at PFF using promo code SCORE35. The promo ends tomorrow, December 2nd. So definitely, if you are looking to get a PFF subscription, now will be the best time to get it over the rest of the year. And it is a year-long subscription that will get you 35% off. So definitely very helpful for you to win your fantasy leagues. I know my recap articles and my podcast certainly should be helping you in your fantasy leagues, but in order to take full potential out of everything we have at PFF, that would be the best way to do it. Outside of that usual schedule for us this week at PFF, we'll have waivers out tomorrow morning. We'll have the 5-tab, or no longer have the 5 to drop, but we'll have the Monday Night Football recap tomorrow. Rest of season rankings on Tuesday, as well as my rankings later on Tuesday. We'll be on with John for the waiver podcast Tuesday morning. I know he will have his IDP recap up tomorrow morning in terms of the podcast there, since we were both trying to get the right intros for our podcast at the right time at the start of this year. So I know he'll have this podcast out, and I'm sure he'll have the normal schedule with other IDP podcasts later in the week, as well as Start Sit with Nick on Thursday. So another fairly normal week as we get closer and closer to the fantasy playoffs. So again, I hope everyone had a great week 13, and until next time, peace out.